The Man with No Heart. In a small, remote village nestled between the misty mountains, there lived a man named Samkid. He was a wealthy landowner, known far and wide for his hard business acumen and ruthless nature. Despite his wealth, Samkid was a man with no compassion, no empathy, and certainly no heart. He saw people as mere tools to build his empire, and he treated them accordingly. To him, kindness was weakness, and mercy was for the foolish. Samkid's wealth had come at the expense of others. He had once owned a thriving rice mill, but when the mill's workers, many of them poor and struggling, asked for better wages, Samkid refused. He claimed it was impossible and that they should be grateful for what little they had. As a result, the workers were forced to endure harsh conditions, some even succumbing to illness because of their grueling labor. But Samkid paid no mind to their suffering. His only concern was the bottom line, and his wealth grew with each passing year. The villagers feared him, for he had a reputation for turning a blind eye to the desperate and downhearted, and anyone who dared to challenge him would find themselves out of work and destitute. One day, after a long season of harvest, a desperate widow named Fim came to Samkid, pleading for assistance. She had no food for her children and had heard of Samkid's generosity in helping others. Fim begged him for a small loan to feed her family, promising to repay him when the next harvest came in. But Samkid, with his cold eyes and sharp tongue, dismissed her without a second thought. "You are nothing but a beggar," he sneered. "You want me to feed your family? I have no time for parasites. Take your pitiful request elsewhere." Fim left in tears, her heart breaking, and the villagers could hear her wailing as she walked down the dirt road. That night, Fim passed away from hunger, and the villagers whispered that her spirit would return to seek justice for the cruelty she had suffered. Unbeknownst to Samkid, the very next night, as he lay in his grand bed, he felt an eerie chill fill the room. The air grew thick, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He opened his eyes to find himself staring into the cold, lifeless eyes of Fim's ghost. Her face was gaunt, pale, and full of sorrow. "You will regret turning me away, Samkid," she whispered in a voice that sent shivers down his spine. "Your heart is as cold as the grave, and you will never know peace again." Samkid, terrified, jumped out of bed and tried to speak, but no words would come out. The ghost of Fim vanished as suddenly as she had appeared, but her words lingered in the air. Samkid tried to shake off the fear, dismissing the encounter as a figment of his imagination, but the coldness in his chest grew heavier with each passing day. In the weeks that followed, strange things began to happen. Samkid's crops began to fail, his wealth started to dwindle, and his once thriving rice mill ground to a halt. One evening, as he sat alone in his study, an old beggar came to his door, asking for food and shelter. Samkid, in his bitter state, grew furious. "I've had enough of your kind," Samkid spat. "Leave my property at once." But the beggar only smiled and shook his head, his eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. "You cannot escape the consequences of your actions, Samkid," the beggar said softly. "Your karma will find you, whether you like it or not." Samkid tried to push the man away, but as he touched him, a wave of cold washed over him. The beggar vanished into thin air, leaving behind a cold emptiness. From that day onward, every night, Samkid was haunted by the spirits of those he had wronged. Each one came to remind him of his cruelty, their faces twisted with anguish, their voices filled with anger. The final blow came when the villagers, once terrified of Samkid, gathered together and burned down his rice mill. They had long been fed up with his greed and cruelty, and when they saw that his business was failing, they believed it was time for him to learn the true meaning of hardship. Samkid fled into the mountains, a broken man, but the ghosts never left him. The spirits followed him relentlessly, whispering their grievances and reminding him of the heartless man he had been. One night, as he walked through the misty mountains, Samkid found himself standing before a dark, foreboding temple. Desperate and broken, he entered, hoping to find solace or a way to escape the relentless hauntings. Inside, an old monk sat, his face kind yet sorrowful. The monk looked at Samkid and said, "Your soul is heavy, burdened by the weight of your past deeds. Only by seeking redemption can you lift this curse from yourself." Samkid kneeled before the monk, his heart finally opening to the truth of his actions. "How do I redeem myself?" he asked, his voice trembling. The monk smiled faintly. You must give what you have taken, help those you have wronged, and seek forgiveness from those who have suffered because of you. Only then will your heart begin to heal. Samkid spent the rest of his days making amends, seeking out those he had wronged, offering them help, and showing kindness where once there was only cruelty. He helped the poor, fed the hungry, and worked tirelessly to right the wrongs he had done. Years passed, and Samkid grew old. On his deathbed, he finally understood the lesson the spirits had taught him. Karma, he realized, was not just a force of vengeance. It was a cycle of cause and effect, of giving and receiving. His heart, once cold and lifeless, had been warmed by the compassion he had learned too late. But in his final moments, he knew that he had found peace, and that perhaps was the greatest redemption of all. And so, Samkid's story became a cautionary tale, passed down from generation to generation, reminding all who heard it that the heart is the most important part of a person. Without it, we are nothing more than shadows in the wind.